Hello, everybody. I'm so delighted to welcome Chelsea Clinton here to Unscripted. Chelsea serves as the vice chair of the Clinton Foundation. She's a New York Times bestselling author of extraordinary books, from She's Persistent in Sports to the Book of Gutsy Women. Today, our theme is women's leadership, protecting the vulnerable amid COVID-19. We're so excited that you're here, Chelsea. Welcome.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here and also to continue to learn more about your work around equitable healthcare access in COVID and beyond.
Thank you. Well, let's kick off our discussion on the topic of women's empowerment and leadership. The question comes from ECC volunteers at Wellesley College. Today, female doctors, nurses, and first responders on the front line distributing vaccines and caring for patients. And then more and more people are recognizing women's great sacrifices and leadership during this time of crisis. And this pandemic also reminded us of other challenging times. And some of our volunteers mentioned that during World War II, when Rosie the Riveter ushered in a new wave of gender equality and women's rights. And then that was a tremendous progress in our society. But then, after the war, when the soldiers came home, women's rights sort of declined slightly from the peak because it was harder to find employment if women wanted, so on and so forth. So then the question comes to, how do we maintain this level of empowerment and recognize women's leadership going forward, perhaps it was during and after the pandemic?
I think such an important and critical question, not just for women, but for men too. I think too often kind of conversations around equal pay or paid family leave are framed as just women's issues, and yet we know these are really societal issues. And we know that while women have never been compensated equally in our country, and this is especially true for minority women, for Asian American women, for Black women, for Hispanic women, for Indigenous and Native American women. This COVID-19 pandemic has kind of put kind of unique, terrible pressure and had disproportionately terrible impacts on women, and particularly women of color. So, if we just even think about the labor statistics from December, every single net job loss in the United States was borne by women of color. So we are clearly kind of failing, even in the best of times, non-pandemic times, to adequately support, protect, affirm, empower women. But we are particularly failing women in these COVID-19 pandemic times. So, to answer your question about kind of what do we do to kind of, as we hopefully move out of this moment, to kind of better protect kind of women, better ensure that we are according kind of meaningfully equal kind of dignity and opportunity to women. I think we know what we need to do. We know that we need kind of paid family leave and kind of paid maternity and paternity leave. The United States, rather ignominiously, is one of the only countries in the world to not have paid maternity leave, and we know that it can't be 4 or 6 weeks. We know that it needs to be at least 4 months to enable those critical early moments of bonding and nurture and support, and also for women to heal. We know, if we think about kind of student loan debt, like we know, how much this is also a women's issue, especially if we think about graduate school student loan debt, and how much of a weight that is on women's ability to make the decisions we want to make instead of the decisions we have to make. So, the conversations around kind of erasing or forgiving student loan debt are also kind of related to women. If we think about climate change, we know how climate change and pollution disproportionately affect families of color, and particularly women and children of color. So whether we're talking about fracking or we're talking about cleaner energy, like these are also really fundamentally kind of not only public health issues, but also women's issues. So I would say, I think we know what we need to do to better support and protect women. There are actually so many of the conversations we're already having, even if they're framed kind of in climate change or in a student loan or kind of maternal health. And we just need to go about then doing it. We need to make policy decisions that are responsive to what the data says. And I think if we actually did that, it would be hugely meaningful, certainly for millions of American women, but also hugely meaningful ultimately for our society, for our economy, and like for a better sense of a shared future.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for that answer. Well, then now let's turn to an issue that you also touched upon, the issue of minority equality, especially now during vaccination. Last week, New York City releases initial vaccine data, and it showed a rather deep racial disparity. African Americans, which made up over almost a quarter of the city's population, only accounted for 11% of those vaccinated, and similar situations are going on for Latino Americans, Asian Americans as well. So what do you think are some of the leading factors, perhaps, contributing to the vaccine hesitancy among some minority group during this period of time? And what can we do? What should we do as a society to better protect everybody equally?
So I think, in New York City, which like I call home, we have issues both of access, which I think are actually the larger issues, and then we do have issues of vaccine hesitancy, and the issues of access, are manyfold. I mean, they're and the issues candidly today are different than they were even a few weeks ago. So kind of the issues of how complicated it was to sign up for vaccination appointments, and how you could only even engage in that complexity if you had access to the internet, because you had to sign up online. So you had to be able to kind of have access to the internet. You had to have a device that could enable you to access the internet. And then you had to be able to navigate kind of in its first incarnation. If you were a New York City resident over the age of 65, there were 51 different kind of fields you had to fill in or answer. So just so many kind of entrenched barriers there. And initially, while to give New York City some credit, it went live not just in English. There were a few languages. There were also only a few languages. So if kind of your native language was not one of the ones initially included, if you spoke something else or you read another language beyond kind of English, Spanish, Mandarin, French, Portuguese, and I think there was a sixth, Bengali, maybe, then you were out of luck. So thankfully now, the system has been somewhat streamlined. There are kind of more kind of language accessible options to enable kind of more people to be able to access the site, but you still have to have internet access, and you still have to have a device that can access the internet. So there's no ability to kind of call a number. There's no kind of automatic enrollment where kind of everyone in a family medicine practice above a certain age kind of would automatically be enrolled. And then we had another access challenge that kind of is one that I find particularly painful, which is that, people who kind of had family members who could help them navigate kind of, were on like family rotations. So someone was up at like 24 hours of the day in a given family, able to kind of log on to the site to try to get their loved one registered. And while of course, like I love that, like we have these acts of like family solidarity, if you're, a single older person and you don't have family that can do that for you, like you were further disadvantaged. And then we had kind of the people who had all the advantages, many of whom were more likely to be white, more likely to be higher income, who were not like lying about their age, but were able to kind of find slots in vaccination sites in neighborhoods that weren't meant for them, that were meant for Black New Yorkers, for Hispanic New Yorkers, and so kind of that then became a real kind of equity challenge. So we had all of these access related challenges that now New York City is trying to solve in a few ways. They've simplified the sign up. There are a number of kind of not-for-profit efforts that have sprung up to help kind of blast out when they're open slots for vaccination at different vaccine sites. So kind of there's never hopefully an open slot in New York City. And on the kind of equity side, New York City has now restricted kind of who can go to which site. So for example, like the new site at Citi Field in Queens is, 50% of slots are being reserved for Queens residents. The other 50% of slots are being reserved for essential transport workers, including taxi drivers. At the Armory, which has been the largest site in New York City in Upper Manhattan, now you have to kind of prove that you're from one of 20 zip codes from Upper Manhattan or the Bronx. So while I wish these measures weren't necessary, I wish that people were kind of waiting their turn. I wish everyone had equal access to technology, kind of technological literacy, to family members to help kind of navigate the system, or to be online at the like exact point when new slots open up. At least the city is trying to increase equity kind of by saying who can be vaccinated in what place. And then we do have real issues of vaccine hesitancy. I think right now in New York, our issues are bigger issues are around access. And of course, our bigger issues are also around supply, because we, like every place across the country, kind of wish we had more vaccine. But we do have real issues of vaccine hesitancy from people who are worried that the process was too rushed, worried that the process was too politicized under the previous president, worried then that kind of scientific corners were cut, worried that kind of the mRNA vaccines, because they are a new kind of mode of delivery, kind of may have side effects that aren't known yet. And then unfortunately, kind of the kind of traditional anti-vax kind of completely decoupled from kind of science or reality concerns that kind of these vaccines may cause harm, cause autism and more. So there are very, I think, real questions related to the development of these vaccines that thankfully have very real answers. We just have to ensure that people are hearing those answers and hearing those answers consistently and hearing those answers from sources they trust. So there's a lot that we have to do, but we have to do this work because the only way through kind of this crisis is by reaching herd immunity through vaccination.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And one final, very quick question. During this pandemic, over 3,000 volunteers and members of the ECC, the Schools Coalition of Tolerance, who've been translating hospital information from English into several languages, trying to promote this equitable access to healthcare for minorities. I'm wondering if you would be willing to say a few words to young volunteers that are working on this project and beyond, and perhaps your take on young people's contribution during this pandemic.
I think, first, like, just thank you. And hopefully, all of your volunteers realize how valuable your work is just by even doing the work, by helping people access the healthcare that they need, whether that is to answer questions around a vaccination or to answer a question about a diagnosis or a prescription they've received for something that has nothing to do with COVID. This is all so crucial and so valuable. And, I would just say to your kind of second question about young people being engaged, hopefully you're seeing kind of how your energies and your efforts, make a difference. And then I hope that work will be part of your life kind of from here on out, wherever your life may take you, whether you kind of go into healthcare yourself as a medical student or a nursing student, or someone who works in drug discovery, or kind of who works kind of to manage hospital operations, or whether kind of you go off to be an entrepreneur in a non-health related field, or a lawyer or an engineer, or a teacher, kind of that kind of this work hopefully can always be part of how you think about your life, because as you will have seen, it is profoundly important and profoundly meaningful work.
Thank you so much. And that is a wrap. Thank you so much, Chelsea, for taking the time. We're just so grateful to not only listen to you, but also have the action from the Clinton Foundation. Well, we promise you that we'll continue to do the work that we've been doing now. And thank you. Have a wonderful rest of your day and happy New Year.
Yes, Happy New Year and stay safe, everyone.
Thank you.